My hat's cool.
All right, welcome everyone. This is Abel.
This is Tony.
And this is Discourse.
All the track tapes are ready.
So, welcome. Today we're talking about New York Collapse. It's about pretty much a survival guide to urban catastrophe, and it's written by Warren Merchant.
This book takes place shortly after the Division video game, right? So in the video game, the very first video game, right now part 2 is out. But in the very first video game, the dollar bug or the dollar flu is spreading, and it spreads on Black Friday. Somebody has engineered, I think, the Ebola virus or something like that and put it on the back of dollar bills because they knew during the Black Friday, everybody would be exchanging money and everybody would be touching it. And it was engineered so that it slowly spread throughout the population with no symptoms. So that way it infected the most people. And then slowly, I think like after a week or 10 days or something like that, it starts killing people, right? So it becomes deadly. Kills about 90% of the population, I believe. Right?
From research, that's what it says, a potential for it.
Yeah. So in the video game, it gives a very good description of how this happens. It just spreads through Black Friday, kills a lot of people. And this particular book takes place in Manhattan in the island of New York City. And while it spreads, National Guard's called in, the police force is called in, and they quarantine the city and block it off from the rest of the country.
Sound familiar?
Very familiar. There's a piece in here that speaks pretty much directly to what we're experiencing now, right?
Yeah.
And it's really weird because this book was actually published a couple of years ago, right? The video game Division 1 came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And is uncanny about everything it talks about in this book. It's pretty much happening today. So that's the Division video game. This book is actually, it's 2 different books actually. It's a survival guide written by somebody named Warren Merchant. And he's giving you a lot of information about how to survive catastrophe in an urban environment like New York City, and specifically New York City. He tells you about staying out of high rises and things like that. So it's first survival guide that a man named Bill, he gave it to his wife named April Keller. And he intended it, or she thinks it was intended as a joke.
Yeah, because he put a note on there kind of jokingly, in case you ever need it.
Yeah. So she thinks it's a joke. So she kind of takes it and shoves it in her bag. But this is right when the dollar flu is spreading. So now she sees the survival guide as kind of like Bill was trying to tell her something. He kind of knew this was coming. And as she doesn't read it at all at first, but then she really digs into this book to learn how to survive.
Yeah, also because it was a gift from Bill, her husband, and he dies, at the start of all this. So this is her only keepsake in the beginning. So yeah, so she's kind of like, well, might as well read it. It's all I got from him.
Yeah. So the first part of the book is a survival guide, and the second part of the book is her story surviving the dollar bug, surviving the quarantine, and surviving the madness that happens after the quarantine, after the government breaks down. So this book made it kind of difficult to read, right? Because when I was reading it, she writes in the margins of this book. Because again, it's first a survival guide and then her kind of journal. So while you're reading it, you have to like turn it and turn it and turn it and then flip around, and then flip, and then you end up reading this book like 3 times, right? Because you have to read through the whole book, like she does. She reads through the whole book, right? And then she goes back and reads the entire book again because she really is in a survival situation. She needs to know this stuff. So as she's writing her diary entries, she's writing it and then going back to the beginning and then writing even more, commenting on stuff she had previously said.
Yeah, that's true, because at first it's a survival guide. It tells you what to do in certain situations. And when she read it, she didn't think she was going to be siphoning gasoline from cars or fishing for crabs out in like the lake, or even pigeons. There's mention of catching pigeons to eat at like the last resort.
The book is full of riddles. So the very first sort of riddle that you need to solve is the order in which she writes. Yes. And she writes in a certain order of color. The very first day she has black pen, and then she moves to a blue pen, and then an orange pen, and a red pen, and then a gray pen, and then throughout her throughout the entire story, she's going back and forth several times. So it's really difficult to read because you need to flip around a lot.
So you could flip around, do that, or you could be like me, just read the survival guide as is, and at the end of every page, just understand, read the black ink first, and then read the red ink after, and so on.
See, I read black ink with the survival guide. So I would read the survival guide, and then I would read whatever black ink was there.
Yeah, I read the whole thing, but I just knew this happened now.
You were confused. You were like, wait, what does that even have to do with it?
Yeah. So I was confused at first, but you get used to it. So I was like, all right, this happened now with what you read.
Yeah.
And then she came back later and, okay, that's what happened. And then as I read more, then everything started clicking. And that was fine with me. That's just how my brain works.
That's what I did the very first few pages. I was like, okay, I'm just going to read top to bottom, left to right. I read all of it. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like scattered and all over the place, because if you read it top to bottom, left to right, she'll talk about how Bill just gave her this book. And then she'll talk about how the Rikers are chasing her and trying to kill her, right?
Yeah.
Which doesn't really flow. So you have to read it in the order that it tells you in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And she's always, when she writes a journal entry, it's to keep herself sane. But at the same time, which is a big part of the book, is she's kind of writing to Warren Merchant, or
Merch, she calls him.
To kind of say, are you throwing clues at me? So it's kind of, she's writing stuff back to him, because there's a feeling of, he wrote this book not just as a survival guide, but, come find me and join the cause. Or she doesn't quite understand if he wants her to find him to join the cause, join the division, or a whole different reason. And it just gets at her because her husband, you could probably mention that part about her husband, like why he plays a big part, even though in the very beginning, he's dead.
Yeah, so the story starts with her reading this book sort of jokingly, and then the dollar bug happens, and she witnesses her husband getting captured and killed right in front of her.
Yep.
Right? She goes to report the murder to a police officer. The police officer basically just takes a report and then does nothing about it, because they've got so much going on. They got their hands full. They can't solve this murder.
Just like right now with COVID, when everything was going on, I remember driving on the freeway, no highway patrol, no cops. They were busy at nighttime for riots and all the stuff that was going on. So imagine this book, like a full-on pandemic, and they're just backed up. They can't get to everyone right away.
So another thing that makes this book difficult to read is that it's jam-packed full of basic clues or different riddles that we have to solve, right?
Yeah.
So we're reading the story, and then you start to realize that this survival guide is actually talking specifically about a pandemic in New York. And she finds out that Warren Merchant is not the author's real name. And then she starts finding clues throughout the book that she doesn't tell you directly how to solve. She just tells you there's clues in there. So now we're stuck solving clues. So now we're stuck like flipping the book around. I think I remember one time putting a page up to the light to find some like clues from a graph that's on the back of the page.
Yeah, there's a mention of that.
I'm like looking at papers, and I'm looking at this book, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, so everything you see on the table here was in the book.
What? Oh, look at what I found here. And then there's this paper with an eviction notice. And then there's a map. And then there's this guy playing a trumpet. And then who's she referencing? And then wasn't she referencing that guy? And what is this card? And why am I flipping over here? Yep. And then it even tells you, like, flip to page 25.
Yeah, so it's very confusing. But once you get the gist of it, it's pretty good. And even this, like a missing poster, you look behind it, it's her notes. So it's very interactive. It was very good.
It's frustrating, but it also is very interactive. Like you said, it gets you really engaged with the story, and it makes the book really like a tool rather than just a way to tell a story, right? Because again, it is a survival guide, and it's a legitimate survival guide. He gives some really good tips on how to start a fire, how to keep warm. Boots are really important. Keeping your feet dry is really important. Yeah. These are legitimate survival guides. So you can keep this book and be able to survive an apocalypse.
True. And did you know you could stitch your wound with dental floss? Like,
stitch your
I did not know that.
Floss, or if you don't have dental floss, just shove some super glue in it.
Yes. Yeah, so super glue plays a big part in the book. And April herself, she got a wound eventually one time and used super glue, and it worked. So that's another note. She went back to that section and she wrote like a little aside, like, it actually works. Like,
and it kind of seemed like a real survival situation because she said that she had gotten a cut on her head, and she couldn't see it to stitch it, so she just shoved some super glue in it.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
it worked.
when we're following her story, she is explaining how she survives the dollar bug, and she's explaining how the quarantine is escalating the situation in New York. Right?
Oh, yeah, because they're quarantined and what were they, like the CDC?
It was a lot of different groups, and eventually they come to be known as Joint Task Force, right? Which is a combination of different government agencies. And in the video game, if you play the video game, you get to learn about all these different factions that in the video game you have to fight, right?
Yeah.
The Cleaners, which burn everything, the Last Man
Fanatics.
Battalion, the Rikers gang.
Ex-military.
And then there's the Division. There's a lot of different government agencies that show up in Manhattan to quarantine.
And in this book, in the video game, if you ever played it or look it up, it's already all happened. So now they're all fighting each other, taking control of different sections of New York, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, all of that. But the book, she's pretty much living it as it happened. So they get quarantined. They're supposed to get vaccinations, but that agency never shows up. People start dying in their homes. So what do you do when no one's there to take the bodies? Because I think even the funeral homes were full. People are just dumping bodies out in the street.
So COVID mortality rate, I think, is like 2% or 1% or 2%, very low, right? This dollar bug mortality rate is 99%. It kills the majority of people.
Yep.
So their streets are literally filling with dead bodies.
Yep. And at first she mentions that there was like pretty much garbage trucks, like picking up bodies and taking them over to get disposed of. But towards the middle and end of the book, there's just bodies everywhere. So all you could do, I think there were the nuns going around making sure they were wrapped and the disease doesn't spread. And sometimes rats would go and like start eating the bodies, which pretty much helps like the disease spread. So the nuns were around. It's just a small section, but that was interesting for like a visual.
Yeah, so slowly she reads this book and she starts to realize that the person that wrote it is leaving the reader clues about how to survive and who he is and where he is, right? He wants whoever the reader is to find him. I think if they're smart enough to solve the clues, he wants them to come and find him, right? I think that's the idea.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point of the book, because usually the author writes a story and you just see the author as the author. But in this book, it's kind of like he plays a part somewhat in this pandemic, but she doesn't know if he's there for good, if he's there for bad, what does he want? But it's obvious. He leaves a lot of clues. A lot of times too obvious that he was expecting something to happen because he wrote about it and what to do if that were to occur. But it kept happening so often that April, that's why she keeps writing to him more personally, like, were you expecting this? Like, how'd you know about the dollar bug? Because there's a lot of mentions of get rid of your money quick.
There's several mentions. She counts all the mentions, right?
Yeah.
So
dirty money, infected money.
If this was just a survival guide, he probably would have touched on money once, right, as a subject, and then moved on. But he actually mentions it several times, which is the first indicator she has that this guy is speaking directly to the reader.
Yep.
Right, because he mentions money several times. It mentions how it's a disease. It carries a lot of diseases, or it's really dirty, and that you should get rid of it quickly in a survival situation, which makes sense, right? Because if civilization ends, money is pretty much worthless. So you got to spend it all up front while people still think it has value.
Yes.
To trade it for what you actually need that actually has value, right? Good knife, good boots.
True. Depending where you live, like warm clothes, jackets. And that's very true in any situation. When there's like right now with COVID in the very beginning, you don't know how long it's going to last. So money is still available in the beginning. You could buy a lot of stuff, even though the price does go up because of supply and demand and panic buying, which results in lower supplies.
What? Nobody's going to panic buy?
No.
Nobody panic
Still can't find toilet paper. Jeez. Clorox wipes, like, come on. But this situation got worse. And towards the middle of it, no one wanted money. Like, that's useless. They wanted a trade. There's a lot of bartering stations. Taco trucks became
She says once that she trades 3 9mm bullets for some food.
For like some chicken. You trade drugs for, I don't know, some water. And there's bartering stations across New York. And a lot of the taco trucks become like hubs for food, for trade, for information. And information for, it's a business. During that time, you just started to make a business and survive. It's a trick of information for the black market, for the police, the JTF, pretty much anyone that needs that.
So she, her story is actually not that long, right? The survival guide is actually longer than her story, I think. Her story is actually like, you can consider it a short story.
Yeah.
But she's writing mostly in the margins. And if you put it all together in a single story, it's probably more like a short story. So did you solve any of the clues?
No, not really. I didn't solve any of the clues.
I was like, some of the clues were easy, but some of them I was like, I don't even want to solve this clue.
Yeah. Honestly, for me, I just waited for her to solve it because she kept going back. But either way, with the clues or no clues, that just made it more, interactive, as we mentioned. And I don't know, it kind of made it interesting. It got you more into, it's like reading someone's diary. Like, everyone probably did that as a kid. I
feel like it was very personal.
Yeah.
She did touch on a lot of things about her, while also mentioning the larger story of her being quarantined in Manhattan. I feel like you don't really need to play the video game. If you can catch like a summary on YouTube of just what the video game was about, you can still read this book and enjoy the interaction with it, solving the clues and whatnot.
That's true. I think the biggest thing with the video game is just the division, how they played a big part in the video games. And you play as one of those agents, which is, they're pretty much government, it's like a government agency, but they don't follow any
rules. They're a secret agency of division agents throughout the city or throughout like the country. I think they have secret division
throughout the country.
Agents
that
are activated once a government breakdown happens.
Yep. So they assist like the JTF and the police, but they don't report to them. They're above them. They're like their own group. No one could really tell them, hey, stop or go away or whatever. And they're really useful.
That's what I really liked, because if you play the video game, you play as a division agent, right? And you're fighting against all these factions and completing the story. And then when you read this, you get to hear about the division agents as some kind of like myth or mythical agents. And you're like, I know exactly what those guys are about. But the perspective she has of these agents is like they're some rogue operatives that are there to save people.
Yep. And it's pretty cool because she was sitting in the back of an ambulance that were being transported somewhere. Yeah. They weren't hurt. They were just, I think they bartered with the drivers to take them somewhere safely. And there was an agent sitting down across from her, like holding a gun on his lap, like just any other day. Like these guys, I don't know, what can you compare them to? Like Green Beret or like Special Forces, right?
Yeah, which is interesting because they're basically civilians that get activated once a government collapses.
But they're well trained.
But they're well trained. I don't know how well trained they are to say, are they Green Berets or Army Rangers or something like that? Not really. They are trained, but they don't have like special skills exactly.
They know how to shoot. Like the one guy took out like 6 guys.
They definitely know how to shoot. Well, I guess it's dependent on the player in the video game, right?
Yeah, that too.
I wasn't very good at that video game.
Yeah, but I just relate them to that in a way because there's not too many of them, but it's obvious that they're making like a difference. You know, they're taking on all factions, where some factions, like I guess gangs, they take on each other and that's it. These division agents take on all of them, assist the JTF, and also help civilians. Like in the video game, if you play, there's someone's a hostage or someone's in danger, and you go help them out, and then you move on. That's a division agent. Their ultimate goal is bringing order back to the government, but in this book is New York, which I think that's the hub, or according to April, that's like where everything started and spread out.
Where everything starts, yeah.
And it just affects them more because everyone's so condensed and there's millions of people there.
Yeah, so it's a perfect disease spreader, right? There's so many people there exchanging money. And she comes to find out that maybe her husband is involved.
Oh yeah, so going back to her husband, do you remember what his job was?
He was some kind of like doctor or medical officer working on either, and we don't really know because she doesn't say, he was working on either the cure or he worked on the virus that spread. Because every time she tries to find more information about him, she gets shut down and people tell her, you shouldn't be asking questions.
Yeah, and those are the good guys.
Yeah, the good guys are like, just stay away from this. You don't want to know.
Yeah.
She goes to stay with some people that her husband knew in the city.
Yeah, a couple.
Yeah, and then they go on to survive a couple of days. I don't want to give too much away, but she basically learns to survive on her own, right? She
Yeah,
becomes a survival expert using this book and then using the skills she picked up on the street.
Yeah, and not loot, but scavenge.
Yeah.
Right, and the book does a good job on separating those two, but she starts doing that more often and using the skills. So she starts scavenging for supplies with this couple.
Right, because you need supplies, and I'm really surprised at how much this book predicts basically COVID and the response that we had to COVID, right? So this book was published in 2016, right? So what, 4 years ago, way before COVID, and it is uncanny how well this book predicts the breakdown of society and how people react.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe me, here, I'll read a quote. So this is talking about what happens up to 30 days of the virus, and this is T3. A state of emergency is declared and the city is locked down. Non-essential travel in and out of New York is banned. Subway and bus networks are shut down. So are airports. All gatherings of large groups of people, sporting events, concerts, lectures are all canceled. Schools are canceled, forcing tens of thousands of people to stay home from work to care for children. This, in turn, places increased pressure on municipal and commercial infrastructure. Police and fire personnel, as well as hospital employees, are all working huge amounts of overtime. As hundreds, if not thousands of new cases present themselves every day, doctors and scientists work to sequence the DNA of the chimera bug. The first signs of panic buying appear. Gun stores report a surge in applications for permits. Camping supplies fly off the shelves. Because of transportation restrictions, some items in ordinary grocery stores are already in short supply. Pretty much everything that's happening right now. It was kind of scary, and I think that's why I'm going to keep this book close to me. So, Abel, would you recommend this book?
Yeah. Not just for the story itself. I think the story, to call it, is April's experiences and her journal entries, her diary, because she mostly writes in it, not just to keep herself sane, but also if she were to die and she makes a mention of it, she wants the person that picks it up to learn from it. Hopefully it helps them survive. So I thought that's what got me really involved in the book. But as a survival guide itself, and I've read a few other ones, it's really helpful and useful. How to treat water, where there's water in your own home, like the water tank. That the toilet water itself is just water that's like in your tap, but most people think it's dirty because that's where you...
That was a really good tip. Yeah, turning off the water from your house to the main supply because there's still water left in the pipes.
Yep.
It's a good tip. And that's what I liked about this book, was that it was a legitimate survival guide coupled with her story of survival. Both on their own, not very interesting, but both together, tied with those clues, makes this a very interesting book.
Yeah, that's true, because you could actually get her experiences on using some of these skills.
Have you read this book? Let us know in the comments. Let us know what you think about this book in the comments. We'd really like to know. Were you able to solve any of the puzzles or riddles? Let us know what book you would like us to review next down in the comments. Remember, like and subscribe. Right? Is that it?
I think so.
Wait, no, they should first like and then they should subscribe.
Yeah.
And then they should comment. I believe in that order. Right? Or I suppose you could comment and then like and then subscribe. But really you would like to like, subscribe, and comment.
Like, subscribe, comment.
And then I believe they also have to turn on the bell notification. There's some kind of a notification about updates. So I think you should like, subscribe, comment, and then turn on the bell notifications. Good luck.
Yeah.